Hi, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth, and I'm very excited for today's episode with Stephen Stack. Stephen is an engineer turned financial coach who has a mission to help people build holistic wealth. Stephen became a millionaire by age 31. He is 100% debt-free, and I am very excited to dig into today's episode. Here is Stephen Stack. Stephen Stack, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Such a pleasure. Can you tell the Dreamers a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Stephen Stack. I do financial consulting and coaching of helping people with building wealth. And I use my own personal journey and experiences to be able to help people along their path and quickly. I don't normally like to lead with this, but I know it's important to many folks. I actually ended up making my first million at age 31. So I do speak from real experience when helping others and walking alongside others to share the things that I've done.
Yeah, I think you definitely got people's attention with that, even though you don't like to lead with that. I always like to go back. Can you tell me about your upbringing? Where did you grow up? And what was your experience with money growing up?
Yeah, I'm actually really happy that you asked me to start there. My upbringing, so I'm originally from the capital city, Columbia, South Carolina. So I got to say that with a little bit of pride for those that are from there as well. And grew up with really just salt of the earth parents, humble folks, really thankful to have both of my parents in my life, my mom and my dad, which actually earlier this year they celebrated 52 years of marriage, which is
Amazing.
incredible, amazing, insane, just true life goals. Like most people, they look at celebrities and things like that. And I'm like, man, no, I look at my parents that I know personally and have gotten to watch them up close. So grew up in South Carolina with my siblings. And as far as really money was concerned, my parents did help me have a pretty solid foundation around money of really three things. Number one, don't spend more than what you make. Make sure you put aside money for a rainy day, which nowadays people tend to call it an emergency fund or having emergency reserves or however the savings name is you want to put it. And the third thing was be generous, be giving to others, be mindful of others, that we're really blessed to be a blessing to those around us. And that if you can kind of keep those things intact, that you'll probably live a meaningful life. So I really felt like I had a healthy core foundation. Now, I didn't know a bunch of stuff about investing and things like that, but I did have plenty enough to be dangerous. And last thing I'll say real quickly here is I personally, even though I didn't come from a lot of wealth financially or materially, I really do personally feel that I have never had a day of my life where I didn't feel immensely wealthy. And I say that because I grew up in a home that was rich in love and joy and peace. We laughed a lot. We actually enjoyed being around each other, which low key or high key, however you want to put it, I think that tremendously served me well when it came time to get out on my own and think about things like delayed gratification, being content with the things that I had while pressing forward for more that I desired.
I love that. I say this all the time too. Generational wealth to me, it's beyond just money and material things. And I feel like values, the things, those intangibles that you get from your parents of previous generations actually will take you much further than the material. I'm so glad that you led with that. I was listening to a podcast interview that you did where you talked about the fact that you were not a self-made millionaire. And
Mm.
it's really refreshing to hear that, especially in a day and age where the self-made millionaire narrative or billionaire is what catches people's attention. But literally, I was just on a podcast this week sharing that I would never really call myself a self-made anything because of the foundation, the lessons, the values that I've been able to learn from my family that have played such a big role in my life. And I know you've touched on some of those things already, some of the financial lessons, but beyond that, all of the amazing things that your family has been able to teach you. Because a lot of times people spend their 30s, even 40s and beyond, recovering from financial mistakes that they made early on in life. And obviously, that was not the case with you. I'm curious to hear more about how those lessons, those family experiences guided you in your 20s to get to a point where you became a millionaire at 31.
Yeah, thank you for really asking that and just teeing me up here, because I'm thinking about the fellow dreamers that are listening right now to us speak. And a lot of times when we get into financial conversations, for people, especially that may have families of their own, they're constantly thinking about, man, I want to give my kids what I didn't have. And they may be thinking about the material things and opportunities, which there's nothing really inherently wrong with that. But I always like to encourage people, don't forget to give the next generation the things you did have, and even things that you may not have received that wasn't material. And I say that because I'll just be really real and raw with the fellow dreamers here, of being able to grow up in a home where I was encouraged, where I was able to be affirmed, have time to be paid attention to work through things, whether it was educationally of just doing homework together if I needed to sort some things out, or being in an environment where I really didn't have to question whether or not I was loved and valued. You would think, well, man, what does that have to do with money? But I'd argue pretty much everything.
Mm.
And maybe we'll talk about this later. And really, I'm not like a shameless plug kind of person, but I think it's really important. One of the things I wrote in a book called Simple Money Talks, which is the only one that I've ever written thus far, at least I'll say that, is I said that most people will say that money makes the world go around, but I actually believe that love and the pursuit of it is what makes the world go round. Because I felt really secure in the love in the family that I grew up in, I didn't feel a need to say, man, I gotta have the flyest shoes to feel valuable.
Yeah.
Or even now today, as I'm traveling my way towards 40, I don't feel that I have to have the nicest vehicle for people to pay attention to me, for me to be a somebody. There's a quote that used to be said back in the day, kind of this idea of the suit makes the man. I'm like, no. The man makes the suit.
Ooh, I love it.
I'm me.
It seems that from your upbringing, you left your parents' household as a teenager, just knowing that your value came from within you.
Yes.
Which I think a lot of times, that's something that people sometimes learn later in life. I truly believe in value-based spending. And sometimes we spend our money on things that we actually don't value just because we want the attention. Just knowing that you don't need those things, you can get them if you want them, if you actually value them, I think is half of the battle in terms of wealth building journey, knowing exactly, hey, my value is from within me. I don't need those things to feel valuable. And I'm working towards something as you were. And if I decide to get those things now or later, it's really because I want them.
Right, exactly.
Earlier, you said that you help people with their finances, but can you talk to me a little bit about what you were doing prior to that?
Yeah. Coming up, I was always really good with numbers, which is good for finances, but it's good for a lot of things in life. And so when I went to college, I actually studied engineering. That was my major. And I actually ended up starting in the corporate arena with an engineering role, which was a really good, respected, and pretty well compensated role that I started with. And kind of to place the timing for people, when I started, it was in that 08, 09 timeframe of thinking like housing market crisis, Great Recession is right when I was entering into the workforce.
Got it. You became a millionaire by 31. And I heard you on the His and Her Money podcast saying that early on when you started working, you decided that you wanted to be work optional by age 45. What did you mean by that?
So at the time, personal finance wasn't fleshed out the way it is today. So I had made up this word of saying, hey, I want to be retireable at age 45. And what I meant by that is that by that age, whatever work I am doing or whatever work I would be doing would be precisely what I want to do. That I would not be working a role just because I needed the paycheck. That it would be, hey, no, I just really desire doing this type of work. Or even if for some reason I kind of sort of was doing something that I was just mad about, it's only because I hadn't quite identified precisely what would be the thing that I want to be doing. So I just wanted to have flexibility and have options, at least by 45. I did not have a vision of being 59 and a half or 60 or 65 and just plowing through and working just whatever was in front of me.
How old were you when you made that decision?
I was like 22.
I'm sure people are listening or watching and they're thinking, that sounds good, but they might already be 45. For someone who wants to be work optional in the next 10, 15 years, can you talk to me more about how you were able to even educate yourself to achieve that goal?
I'm going to really try to answer that question more for today because I'll be able to give people more insight than 22. Because at 22, my answer to that was I'm going to invest/save, but really invest at least 50% of my income. But at 22, it's just me. So my costs weren't very high. And I had just come from college where literally the only thing I owned was a futon. That was my thought process then. Today, what I would say is, first off, try to define what are your actual expenses, get an understanding of where you're at, what your typical monthly expenses would be, of just what has to kind of keep life generally going. Now, for some people, they may want to be a little bit more liberal with that. Some people may want to be more conservative with that, but I'll let you figure out that number for you of this is what it would take monthly, and then say, okay, well, then what would it take yearly? And a way you could look at doing that is saying multiplying that yearly number by anywhere from like 25 to 30 times of expenses to at least first off help you establish a target that you're shooting for of saying, hey, I need this amount of assets built up to try to free myself. Now that's kind of like a more somewhat of the ultimate. Now for something that, man, that's too far for me. Can I have 10 years worth of expenses built up in assets? You can figure out your number of just what kind of makes you feel more comfortable with what your current situation is. That's what I would say of trying to figure that part out and then saying, okay, how much do I need to invest to get there? What kind of investment return do I also need to reach that point? Because you're not going to be able to save your way to wealth. You're going to have to invest. You're going to have to take risks. And the reality is, I know for predominantly minority communities, many times we tend to be more risk averse. And just in the interest of time, I won't get into the depths historically for why that is an earned perspective in a lot of ways. But we just need to understand that if you're only saving and not doing any investing, you are also assuming risk by doing that. And it is a surefire way to erode your money just due to inflation. And we're experiencing that right now. We're in a high inflationary environment. So if you're only saving and not putting any money at quote unquote risk, just understand that that is a risk as well. And last thing I'll give it just a quick example, just so people can understand that, because you may be like, oh man, Stephen, you're speaking beyond me and I don't want to do that. I'm a teacher at heart. Think about it this way. If you have to drive to work, or if you have to take public transit, whether it's a metro or bus, whatever the case may be, you are taking risk when you get into the car to drive to work. It's possible someone could hit you. It's possible maybe you get a speeding ticket. There's a lot of different things that can go wrong, but you assume the risk because you're like, hey, I need to get to work to generate income to live my life. So like investing, think of it as, hey, I've got to get in the car. I've got to get in the car towards the potential financial freedom and or independence that I'm looking for.
That's very interesting. So if I'm not investing, I'm basically choosing to stay home and not make a living.
Yeah, that's really a way to think of it, of make a living for your future self. Think of it like that, because in the here and now, yeah, you're earning money right now. But what if you're in a space where you can't generate active income anymore? If you don't make money in your sleep, you'll work till you die.
At 22, when you made the decision to work towards becoming work optional by age 45, can you tell me about what you decided to invest in?
Yes, it really was two things: real estate and the stock market. Again, if we go back, it was like 08, 09. So I'm hearing about how bad the market is, that we're in the worst recessionary environment since the Great Depression starting in 1929 and going forward. So I'm like, okay, if things are really this bad, then I should be looking to buy. This is a great time to buy assets at a discount.
Mm.
Those were the places that I really started and plowed into in those early years. Now, eventually I got some more exposure to different asset classes, but I never stopped investing, even to this day, in the stock market and real estate.
For anyone that is watching or listening to the show that might not know much about the stock market and they're looking at the news right now and people are saying, oh, the stock market is tanking and all that stuff, how can they get started and take advantage of the opportunity that you mentioned, right? Buying when things are not looking good at the moment.
One of the simplest ways for people to get started that can potentially be more of like a layup or low hanging fruit is many people, their jobs, their employers offer some type of work sponsored plan for people to contribute to, and they tend to have some type of incentive with it of giving you a match for you contributing to this plan. Now, obviously, you're going to want to know things called a vesting schedule, which just means how long do you have to be employed there before you get to keep all the money that your employer throws towards your retirement plan in those matches. But that's an easy way to get started. That's right there. It's part of your benefits package, potentially. I know that's not offered for everyone's job, but that's a great place to start. And typically the options are going to be pretty diversified. Many times I'll see some type of index fund type of a setup, or something called a target date fund, or like a life cycle fund. And so for those who are listening right now and you're like, what does he mean? If you're looking at those options, you might see something, say if you're in around your mid 30s, it might say life cycle 2050, which just means it's saying, hey, you're buying assets on a schedule for if you were going to retire around 2050 and you would be around like 60 years old.
Earlier, you said that at that time you were investing 50% of your income. I'm going to assume that you weren't just investing in your company's sponsored retirement accounts. Can you tell me more about what you were doing outside of that?
Yeah, so had the company thing set up, did some general investing in the stock market, used a Roth IRA, used a taxable brokerage account of just a regular, you're just out here investing. For some people, you do like a HSA, health savings account. But I also did real estate. So I knew that I wanted to have long-term rental properties, but I didn't have like super duper crazy capital just laying on the side. What I did is I started by doing something called rehabs or house flips. I was buying properties that were foreclosed and then fixing them up, doing repairs and things like that. And then I would have holding cost of just, hey, now it's fixed, it's on the market. So I'm paying the mortgage, I'm paying for the little bit of utilities and all those things until I got an accepted offer from somebody to buy it from me. And at that point, that's when I actually received proceeds and made a profit on those deals. But I was doing it with a thought to take the chunks to then start buying long-term rentals, which I started buying multifamily properties.
Talk to me more about that.
Right. Yeah. Normal people get a little bit more excited about real estate. I did the flips, started making some chunks of money. But again, I knew I wanted to have more regulated income of having that kind of monthly cash flow from rentals. Because with the flips, no beefs on it. There's people that are amazing with it, but you pretty much don't make your money till the end. Everything before that is you're just spending. You're acquiring the property, you're fixing it up, and then you're waiting until somebody buys it from you. And I'm like, hey, I would love to just actually receive funds as I go. So yeah, I took the chunks, and there was someone that was actually a trusted friend that was already buying in a particular area. He helped me get connected with people in that local market that I wanted to start acquiring properties to be able to get that first multifamily. And then I just started to continue to buy from there. But that's where I started. I'll say this real quick for people that are like, oh my gosh, well, how did you figure that out? How did you find that person? Literally, all I did is I just started talking about what I desired. My company that I was working for, they had training that I had to do just around like time management and public speaking. I'd have to give like a 1 minute speech, 3 minute speech, 5 minute speech. And it was timed. And a lot of times I would use those speeches to actually just talk about my desire to want to get into real estate. And so eventually just did it enough times where there were some people who were like, oh, well, I actually know somebody who's in real estate. Hey, let me get you connected with this person or that person. Or you can go to RIA meetings, like Real Estate Investment Association meetings in your local city, to just start building those connections with maybe realtors, contractors, just all kinds of different people that may be affiliated in that industry, to start building your team and your connections. When the opportunities present themselves, you're ready to buy.
How many units was that first multifamily property?
It was a duplex, 2 units. Yeah, it was actually really exciting to be able to do this. And this is actually something I haven't shared publicly that I'll share right now. Is first off, the first property that I actually bought, I bought an investment property before I had ever bought a home to live in. And if it wasn't for getting an incredible steal of a deal on a foreclosed single family home, I was actually looking to buy a duplex as my primary residence for the first home that I was going to live in, because I wanted to live in one side and then rent out the other side, which this would have been, I was living in the Midwest at this time. I actually never shared that I wanted to do the multifamily situation even back in like 2010 / 2011, when I was really looking at getting a home to live in. I wanted to house hack, but ended up getting a house that was so far under market at that time and was foreclosed on that I'm like, yeah, no, I'm gonna go with this one.
That sounds like a good idea. When you bought that first multifamily, though, the one that obviously was an investment property, how much did you have to save to put down for that property and for repairs and things like that?
Yeah, so I'll give you guys the crazy numbers, which, by the way, when there is a major recession or market reset, it is a wonderful time to be looking to buy. Don't look at it fully in fear. Look at it with hopefulness and opportunity. I had to put 25% down to get it because it was an out-of-state rental property. And just to give you guys the numbers, the first one I bought, it was $50,000.
Wow. That was 2011 though, right?
Yeah. It's back in that time frame. So it was only $50,000. But to put it in perspective, the area where it was in at the height of the market in 2007, this same multifamily property was selling for somewhere around 200,000.
Wow.
Properties that were similar to it. I was buying it already knowing that it was way less than what the potential had been. Now, the market had been overheated, but I'm like, come on now, it's not that much overheated. I knew I was already buying in a good space.
Got it. It's great to hear about your real estate strategies, your investment strategies. Obviously, you received some very valuable money lessons growing up, and you've been making all the right decisions, it seems, from a early age. But I want to hear about one of the money mistakes that you've made?
This is actually another one that I've never shared publicly, one that I actually would say I still think about. So in one sense, I don't have regret about it because I operated in what I knew at the time. But in another sense, I do because I'm like, oh my goodness, I knew what was up. It wasn't many years after I had started buying properties in that area, the same area where I paid $50,000 for that first duplex because I started to continue acquiring more. But there was a deal. And oh man, this is going to kind of bring me to a place. But there was someone who was looking to sell 9 of those for 60,000 each. They didn't want to break off any of them because trust me, if I could have gotten all 9, I would have offered 540,000, which would have been the equivalent of 60,000 for each of the 9. The issue that I was running into at the time was I wasn't legally allowed to have 9 mortgages because coming out of the Great Recession, there were much tighter restrictions and regulations on things around housing and lending practices and things like that. So the regret, or however you want to look at it, was that I really stayed within the box of what I knew. I tried to figure out how to get it amongst those that were around me and just what I understood. But I definitely wish I would have pushed much harder of just taking a stance of saying, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to find a way, not by hook or by crook, legally and ethically, to be able to get the funds. I did talk to someone who would have had a large amount and I would have paid them a percentage just to be able to get access to it, but I gave up too easily.
How much is it worth today? That's
Exactly. Because right now the people listening are like, oh, give yourself a break. It's not that big of a deal. I feel extremely confident that I could have gotten all 9 of them at 60,000 a piece or $540,000 total. These properties were going for over 200 grand not that long ago.
I'm sorry, it hurts.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
So for the listeners, those that, hey, math may not be your thing. If I just round it down and say 200,000 times 9, that's 1.8 million against what you acquiring at 540,000. And by the way, all of them were cash flowing too.
Oh my.
So they were making money too. And there were easy wins because I was already a real estate investor. So I was already a landlord. So it wasn't like I had no experience with managing properties, had a great property manager, knew I could have negotiated getting the property management fees down because now that's 9 more properties or 18 more units that I'm bringing into the fold for them. And there were easy things that needed to be done that would have given the tenants value, but also increased the rents because things would have been repaired or tended to. Because I've always had a mentality of, hey, I treat tenants with dignity, honor, respect as people. I don't look at it as just, oh, this is just money to be made. I'm like, no, people have chosen to make these units their home, their sanctuary of rest and joy and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to reasonably, but still meaningfully do things to reinvest in them. But they were already cash flowing very nicely. Like, I don't really want to say how much it was already making annually after expenses. You're going to make me cry. You're going to put me on the couch.
You've said enough. You've said enough. I'm not even going to go there. But I think that you also have to give yourself some slack because you have more information and more knowledge now. You know more about the resources than back then. It is a tough pill to swallow. I'm not going to lie. But what's the lesson that we can learn from this?
When you have an edge, when you have knowledge, some type of market edge or whatever the case may be, go big. Go big, because part of why I gave up ultimately so easily in that situation was just because I was playing small, because I'm like, that amount of money was more than what I had at the time. So it would have been a big risk, because if I had said, hey, I'm not taking no for an answer, what it would have meant is, hey, I would have been taking on a lot more debt, whether I just got a personal entity or got some type of private loan where you're saying 20% down on 540,000, what would be left would be 432 grand of what the loan would be, which is a lot. Like it's close to $500,000 for a guy in his 20s. So there was probably some just playing too small. I don't know, maybe fear or insecurity. I couldn't tell you precisely what it was, but something stopped me from saying, even though I know these things are going to appreciate, something stopped me from going all out and saying, hey, even though I don't have the answers in front of me of how to do this, I'm literally going to go until I get a yes, because this is a transformative amount of funds that could be made. Literally, we're probably talking really to the tune of at least $2 million.
I like what you just said now. Actually, I don't know if you mentioned this on the podcast, but I've read or I've heard you on other podcasts say that you are a debt-free millionaire. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear now about your decision to be debt-free, because if I'm expanding on what you're saying, then why not leverage debt to continue to build your real estate portfolio?
Right. You're really hitting the nail on the head of where I was at. My understanding was, oh man, well, what if I have this much debt? I know I don't have that much money to be able to pay for this. If this goes sideways, now I'm having to work to keep these properties up and rolling. It was beyond what I could handle. It really would have meant that the investment would have had to work. But the reality is it would have worked. But
Because
I
it
was
already working.
exactly, because it was already working. And I've got a different relationship with even how I view debt. Ultimately, I look at debt as I understand that it is something that you do have to pay back, but there's bad debt of where you're going into debt for things that don't go up in value. That's really how I would define quote unquote bad debt. And some people, again, I've never said this publicly either, what I'm about to say, but some people say good debt and bad debt. I won't call it good debt. I call it strategic debt. Because you do have to pay it back. Like, because if you're called on it and they say, hey, we need you to pay it back, now you're in a spot where you have to pay it back. But strategic debt says, I'm acquiring this debt to get access to an asset that goes up in value and potentially generates income or cash flow that has a surplus beyond the debt payments I have to make. So yes, I am a debt-free millionaire, which includes even my home is paid off, which that was just a personal decision to do that. And I don't regret it. But here's the cool part about it. If I want to, I can always leverage against this thing. Yeah. Literally at any point. It's been paid off for years now, but it's not like I can't tap into the equity on the home. And for those who are wondering, it's called a home equity line of credit or a HELOC. I could do that if I wanted to have access to a fairly high six-figure amount to deploy strategically to build more assets.
I really like the strategic debt versus good debt, because it gives you a clear understanding that even though there is debt that is better than other kinds of debt, you still shouldn't leverage too much debt. So you have to be strategic about it. I love it. Since hitting the millionaire milestone, how has your life changed? Have you made any adjustment to your life?
So in one sense, there were things that didn't change because, I mean, the reality is if you were worth 800 grand or 950 and now you're at $1 million, it's like, okay, cool. I'm at $1 million and now it's over and continuing to go past. So in that sense, a little surreal, but it's easier to make money because you just have more of it. So the compounding effect of it, when the market is churning or you've got all these different assets, you see how much easier it is to make it. Another thing that's kind of just changed with life is I've got more ownership of my time and I'm more mindful of it, of being in the spaces that I actually want to be in versus less of just kind of what I have to be. Even right now, we're doing this podcast. I want to be here.
I'm glad you do.
Right. I want to be here. So meeting with just good people and having the space to be able to do that, those would be kind of like the two big things. Is it's easier to make money or make larger amounts because that compounding effect of wealth building and more ownership of my time.
We talked about knowing that you have value within yourself and not having to spend money on things to feel valuable. But I would love to hear about the last thing that you splurged on.
I'm glad you asked. So when I actually met you at the conference, I was wearing the last thing that I had splurged on. There were some Nike shoes that I had bought a pair of these kicks back in 2019, and they're like my favorite shoes. So comfortable, simple, stylish, classic feel. They're white and black, which is kind of like my essence of me. I'm more of a classic kind of guy with some style, but I don't have to be like super flashy, but I'm put together, right? So I bought these kicks again. So I literally bought the same pair of them that I'd had before. And it was kind of as a celebration because right before going to that conference, I had done 200 days of exercise for the year, which was my goal to hit that. So I had just hit it the night before and I'd already bought the shoes. They had shipped. And I'm like, man, I'm gonna wear them because they super comfortable and they look nice too. If I ain't have to get up, I would put them in the camera.
Stephen, I could really just keep going and keep talking to you, but I think it might be time to move on to the rapid fire questions. Okay. And you can just answer with the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Tell me about a book that changed your perspective on life.
Ooh, so I'm gonna go different here. It's called The Color of Money by a lady named Mirza Baradaran. It's the history of Black banks and the racial wealth gap. Phenomenal book. Changed so much of my thinking in a good way.
What's one life lesson you learned the hard way?
Make sure you understand what you're investing in. Likely, if you don't understand how it works, how it makes money for you and for all parties involved, it probably isn't good for you to invest in.
What's one thing about money you wish you could tell your younger self?
Go big. Don't play small.
What's the best investment in yourself you've made so far?
Every bit of trainings, certifications, books, coursework, obviously all the good ones. Sometimes when you go through that, you're like, dang. Oh, yeah, all of them.
Fill in the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is?
Flexibility.
What do you want your legacy to be?
He loved God and people.
Stephen, it's really been great having you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing all your gems with the listeners and the viewers. Please tell the dreamers where they can find you.
Yeah, few different ways. I've got a website. It's just StevenLStack.com. Stephen with a V, so STEVENL Stack, STACK.com. So that's one way. On social media, I like to regularly share things just to encourage people around money, life, just things that are going to help you ultimately in your wealth building journey, motivate you, challenge you, etc. My handle for Instagram is Stacking with Stack, so stacking with a G with Stack. Same for TikTok and Facebook. For Twitter, it's just Stephen L. Stack. I'm probably most active on Instagram, but please feel free to follow me. If you met me through this as a dreamer, feel free to even slide in the DM and be like, hey, what's up? I heard you on the Dreamers podcast. I'm generally pretty responsive, actually, with the messages as well.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Truly. Thank you.